Hello Internet, how are you all doing today? I'm doing amazing. I hope you're having a spectacular week, and going into the weekend I hope you're ready for an amazing weekend. Today I am going to be continuing on from my last podcast in speaking about my journey. So the last podcast I talked about where I'd come from, my career, my company, the history, that kind of thing. And this week I'm going to be talking about where I am now, how I found my purpose, and we're also talking about a failure or a setback that I recently experienced, and then the future, where I'm seeing myself going in the next year to 2 years. So without further ado, I'll get right into it. Purpose. So I touched on this in the last podcast. Purpose is never a thing that I really found I had. I enjoyed my work. I enjoyed working with clients, but I also didn't ever feel this driving force to move forward. Never really saw, for lack of a better term, a deeper meaning to all of it. And recently, in the last couple of months, so just to go back to that again, whenever I had a client come to me with an event, whenever I had something on my plate for catering, I would always do it to the very best of my ability. So when I say purpose, I mean purpose in driving my business forward, in finding new audiences and finding new ways to work with my clients and in new avenues. So when people came to me, I would do the jobs to the best of my ability, but moving into new areas was never something that I really put any energy into. So in the last couple of months, I do a lot of driving. So in the catering, I do driving. I'm doing drop-offs and pickups and product sourcing and client meetings and vendor meetings, tons and tons of driving. So I would always listen to music. And I started to get tired of the music I was listening to. It seemed like the same old stuff. And maybe that's not good sourcing on my part, but either way, I was getting tired of listening to music. So I started listening to talk radio. I listened to the local channels that were the news, and then the national channels, the news. But I started to get bored of that as well, even though I continued listening to it. And one day I was at a Calgary executives meeting in the morning, and there was this wonderful lady. She was putting on a presentation and talking about, touched on podcasts. And one thing she said really stuck with me. She said, if you're not listening to podcasts while you're driving, I really don't know what you're doing. And I went home with that, and I went, you know what, maybe I should give it a shot. I touched on podcasts before, but never spent a heck of a lot of time on them. So I did some research. I Googled best business podcasts, and there was a list of about 6 of them that came up, and I took the top one and I downloaded an episode and I listened to it. And this episode was from the Gary Vaynerchuk podcast, the Gary V audio experience, as he calls it. And Gary V is an entrepreneur in the States, in New York. And he is a very brash personality, big personality. And I wasn't quite sure what I thought about him after the first episode, but I knew that what he was saying was ringing really true with me, even if the way he was saying it didn't quite strike me, but what he was saying, I felt it so deeply. So I kept listening. I listened to another episode, and I think by the end of episode 2, I was completely hooked. Gary talks about finding what you're good at, putting the work in, putting your customers at the center of your business, and doing the work. Like just moving forward, loving what you do, finding what you love, and just doing the work and, putting in the time. And everything that he said just sat so well with me. And so all I did was consume Gary V content. Anytime I wasn't doing something that I needed to be, paying attention for. So while I was doing paperwork, I wouldn't. While I was at home with my spouse, I wouldn't be in this. But when I was driving, I was listening to podcasts. When I was doing housework, I was listening to podcasts, gardening, walking, anything. Any spare time that was passive, that I couldn't be doing anything else for, I was listening to Gary. And it just put positivity and motivation, for lack of a better term, into my ears all the time. And that's what he preaches as well. Positivity, empathy, just doing the right thing. And it was so great. So through that, and through listening to a few other podcasts as well, I really started to look at my business as a whole. And I saw it, and I saw what I was doing, and I realized that I really, really loved it. And I loved cooking, the creativity on that part, but I more so loved working with my clients. I loved the idea that my service wasn't necessarily to cook for people, which it was, of course, but really I was selling quality time. I am selling quality time, because when you're hosting an event and you're in the kitchen the whole time, you're not spending that quality time with your loved ones. And so that's what I realized that my business was, quality time with loved ones. So I started to really even more so than I had before, put the customer at the center of my business and really started to move forward with what I wanted to do. Now, at the same time, so there's that purpose. And I started thinking about business more, and with the CEA and Rotary and all these wonderful businessmen and women around me all the time, I really started to be thinking about where my business could go. Not going hard on any idea, but really just considering possibilities. And one day my spouse and I were talking about something, and we were talking about the microbrewery scene in Calgary where we live. And I had this idea of doing pop-up fish and chip stands with these breweries. And I'd inherited from this gentleman at Rotary a bit of a fish and chip stand, the equipment and such, and the methods to do so. And I just thought that expanding that into breweries would be an amazing idea. The ones that didn't have kitchens, that didn't have full service menus, that just had snacks. And I saw it as mutually beneficial. The breweries would get an option of food for their clients, and I would get to use the established clientele that the breweries had, and we would just work together and have this awesome collaboration. So looking into it, I called up my health inspector and I told him the whole idea. He approved me after we had adjusted a few things, and I just moved forward, and I talked to some breweries, was really excited about it, and I booked the entire summer, which was amazing. I was so excited. And then the night before my first fish and chips pop-up at a brewery, my health inspector emails me and told me that he had made an error, that he had classified me wrong, and unfortunately, because of the way I'm set up, I'm not approved to move forward. I was devastated. It hit me so hard. I scrambled. I was trying to find ways around this problem, how to figure it out, how to collaborate with someone else to make it happen, how to get a sink, even considered getting a food truck to make all this happen. But at the end of the day, through all this and tons of emails and tons of looking into it and brainstorming, it just wasn't able to move forward. Now, the biggest part of that for me was having to call the breweries who had already invested money and time into some advertising and tell them that I wasn't going to be able to fulfill my obligations. Through no fault of my own, I had done as much due diligence as I could, but I couldn't fulfill my obligations. And that was horrible. It's interesting that the year or two before, I had lost the company that I had built up, and that, I built up this company, and then all of a sudden it ended up not being mine anymore. And I was irritated at that, but it was fine. And then having this situation happen, I was devastated. it took me a little bit to get over it. And after I'd had those conversations with those breweries and, done it in a way I hope that I could still continue with those relationships to some level or another, I was back in thinking mode. And I totally credit finding that purpose for the way I came out of that situation. I came out of that and I started thinking, I'm like, okay, well, what's next? I'm not going to go back to the method I was doing before, passively waiting for clients to come my way and just going with the flow. That was just completely organic. I was not going to do that anymore. So what's the next step? And I thought about the issues that I've struggled with as a caterer, and one of them is finding enough time at the commercial kitchen that I work out of. So coming out of the last couple of months, I had a little bit of capital in the bank, so I started to think, well, what if I had my own kitchen space and maybe rented that out to caterers or food providers such as myself, and I could cater out of that space, but then as well I could provide a service for other food providers that maybe are having difficulty finding or having space in kitchens. So I started looking, and this is a completely open option to me. There's a ton of properties right now that are available, and even though I'm maybe not in a space at this moment to check it out, that's the direction I'm moving in. I'm thrilled to be doing this. I'm just going to be working hard, developing my client base, building more relationships, and continuing with that path. But then looking to the future into owning this kitchen and making that happen for myself as well. So to summarize all of that, coming out of the last few months, which is a short period of time in the scheme of things, it's been very important to me. I've come out of the last few months with two main things that I'm moving forward with, and I'm sure there's going to be many others along the way, but these two are super important for me right now. The first one is that finding that purpose in the catering, where the focus and realizing that focus is not necessarily on the business. It is on the business, but it's not on the food. It's on the client experience. It's on creating that ease and that situation where my clients can really enjoy the quality time that they want with their loved ones. So putting that at the center of my business as compared to, I guess, on one of the branches, just keeping that as a core value and moving forward with that is going to change, even ever so slightly, the way that my business is run, the way that I interact with clients, and the things that I prioritize over other things. The second one is that I'm keeping moving forward, that I know that I'm resilient, and even though this failure is a relatively small one, I have hope that when the next one comes, because everyone's going to fail much more than they're going to succeed, but that's going to give us all the tools to succeed, that I'm just going to keep moving, that I'm going to find the next thing, that I'm going to look forward and figure out what the next step is. And in the words of Jay Shetty, who has a podcast of his own, On Purpose, he's a very well-known motivational speaker and life coach, I believe. He said, rejection is just redirection. And that's how I'm seeing this situation here. Because if that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't be on this trajectory, and I'm excited beyond belief about where this is going to take me, whether that goal changes in 6 months or it doesn't change at all and it's exactly where I end up being. I've got a goal and I've got a direction, and if this ends up happening the way I want it to, or if it ends up changing into a new model or whatever, but if with the current vision, I'm going to be able to service my customers to a better. I'm going to be able to do a better job. That came out very terrible, but I'm going to be able to do a far better job giving my customers what they deserve, as well as providing a service for other colleagues in the industry who need the space to work out of that's safe, that's wonderful, and that feels good to work out of with like-minded individuals, and making a business out of that. So I'm thrilled to be moving forward. I hope this hasn't been too repetitive, and I hope you've gotten something out of it. So thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and I hope you have an awesome weekend, and we will see you next time.